It's wonderful to be back here in Chatham House. This autumn, the great debate on Britain's role in Europe has, as ever, generated a lot of heat, yet little light. We want to be in, we want to be out. We want to repatriate powers, use our veto, keep our pint, save our pound, protect our strongest export market, be critical of Germany, not end up like Greece, feel proud of our role in creating peace in Europe, yet cynical about an acronym winning the Nobel Prize. And just last night, in a House of Commons debate on the European budget, we saw Europe turned once again into a party political football as opportunists sought to score a party political point. But when it comes down to it, there is a serious debate to be had, and we do have some serious decisions to make. In Europe today, there are effectively three places you can be. They fit together like rings round a circle. There's the core, where the Eurozone countries are now pulling together more closely, integrating further to shore up the single currency. Then there's the ring around that, the inner circle, the states who aren't in the euro, but are members of the European Union. And then there's the outer circle, where you find the accession countries, EEA countries, Norway, Switzerland, and so on. The United Kingdom is in the inner circle, but the terrain is shifting. The core is tightening. To what degree, we don't yet know. Some states on the outside are seeking over time to head further in. And as a different Europe emerges over the coming years, we have to decide where the United Kingdom fits within it. What role will we play in our new neighbourhood? Very few people are now suggesting we move into the centre. Joining the euro will not be in our interests anytime soon, certainly not in my political lifetime. But there are forces who want to pull us towards the edge, towards the outer circle, reducing the extent to which we cooperate on the continent, happy for the channel to widen, hoping even that it becomes a gulf. Today I want to explain why I believe that is a very dangerous position, leaving the United Kingdom isolated and marginalised. And I want to offer a more compelling alternative. A strong United Kingdom, influential in Europe, and so more influential in the world. Working with our allies on the issues that matter to our prosperity and security. Driven by pragmatism, as opposed to dogma in these debates. Unambiguously in the inner circle. That will require an approach that is engaged and balanced. So not accepting every request or regulation sent from Brussels, but equally cooperating constructively where it is in our national interest to do so. In our immediate future, that means three things. 1, a tough EU budget settlement. 2, defending and deepening the single market and our place in it for the sake of growth and jobs. And 3, taking the decisions on law and order that will keep British citizens safe. The Europe debate will continue to run and run as the Eurozone integrates further. That is certain. And here in the United Kingdom, we will find ourselves talking about it, thinking about it, arguing about it frequently over the coming years. But right here, right now, we need to focus on the United Kingdom's priorities, and they can be easily summed up. Tough on the money, more jobs, more criminals behind bars. Before I turn to those, however, I want to focus on a proposal which is doing the right rounds at the moment, that the best way to improve the UK's position in Europe is to renegotiate the terms of our relationship with the rest of the European Union, that we should opt out of the bad bits, but stay opted in to the good bits, and that the way to do that is a repatriation of British powers. That seems very reasonable. In fact, it's a pretty seductive offer. Who would disagree with that? But look a little closer, because a grand, unilateral repatriation of powers might sound appealing, but in reality, it is a false promise wrapped in a Union Jack. And let me explain why. I'm all for reducing frivolous and expensive European rules. At the weekend, we heard stories about proposals to regulate the shoes and jewellery British hairdressers wear. That kind of thing is clearly too much. Having worked at the heart of the European Union myself, I can certainly give you plenty more examples where that came from. And more profoundly, we need to focus the European Union, refocus it, so it does more where it adds value and less where it doesn't. I'm very proud of this government's track record in working with our European partners to do just that, whether that's reducing EU red tape for small business or working towards an agreement on a European patent after 23 years of negotiation, or getting long overdue agreement to devolve powers over fisheries policies. But there's a lot more we need to do to get Europe focused on the policies that create economic growth and make it more competitive. And I want the United Kingdom leading that. So I don't think the European Union is perfect by any measure, and I'm a big advocate of EU reform. But this idea that we should or could extract ourselves from the bulk of EU obligations is nonsensical. It is wishful thinking to suggest we could effectively give ourselves a free pass to undercut the single market, only then to renegotiate our way back into the laws that suit us. The rest of Europe simply wouldn't have it. What kind of club gives you a full pass with all the perks, but doesn't expect you to pay the full membership fee or abide by all the rules? If anyone else tried to do that, if the French tried to duck out of the rules on the environment or consumer protection, if the Germans tried to opt out of their obligations on competition in the single market, we would stop them, and rightly so. And let's be honest, many of the people who advocate repatriation are the same people who want us out of the European Union altogether. For them, no rebalancing of powers would ever be enough. And so there is no hard border between repatriation and exit. Because for these people, repatriation is pulling at a thread, and they want to unravel the whole thing. Just look at the last few weeks. As soon as we start talking about repatriation, we descend into the in versus out debate. And heading to the exit would be the surest way to diminish our great country. Because what then? Become the next Norway or Switzerland? Advocates of repatriation point to these nations and say that they have the best of both worlds, access to Europe's markets without an assault on their sovereignty. But these countries sit and wait for bills and directives from Brussels, duly paying their bit, changing their laws, but with absolutely no say over Europe's rules. No political representation, no national voting rights, no voice at all. They work by what is called fax democracy. You find your instructions on the machine in the morning and you follow them. They have no meaningful sovereignty in the European Union. Norway has had to implement 3/4 of all EU legislation, including the Working Time Directive. They pay into the EU budget for the specific programs they participate in and for development grants to new member states. Switzerland has no guaranteed access to the single market. They have to negotiate on a case-by-case basis, and right now they're having to match, even surpass, rigorous EU banking regulations just to protect business between Swiss and European banks. To go down that route would be a catastrophic loss of sovereignty for this nation. And I want better for the United Kingdom. And our other allies want better for us too. It's long been the case that the United Kingdom stands tall in Washington because we stand tall in Brussels, Paris, and Berlin. There's a great deal to our enduring special relationship across the Atlantic. But for the Americans, the UK's leverage on our own continent has always been part of our appeal. And that will remain the case, no matter who's in the White House after next week. And while it is, of course, important that we form new alliances in the world, in Asia, India, Latin America, the idea that we can float off into the mid-Atlantic, bobbing around in a new network of relationships without a strong anchor in Europe, while countries around the world, incidentally, are working more and more in regional blocs, is clearly not a sound strategy in a fast-moving, fluid, and insecure world. Those who advocate turning our back on our neighbours seem to think we have a ready-made web of alternative alliances, a set of international agreements with other countries that could readily sustain us. But that isn't how it works. The European Commission has just confirmed, for instance, that if the United Kingdom suddenly left the European Union, we would instantly lose access to every EU trade agreement with a third party. Agreements with 46 countries are in place, and agreements with a further 78 are under negotiation. Our membership of the European Union gives us access to all of them, and that includes almost every Commonwealth country. The European Union is now looking at opening negotiations with 9 more countries, 2 of which, Japan and the USA, would be very significant indeed. Do we really want to leave the EU, lose these free trade agreements for UK exporters, which go above and beyond WTO rules, and potentially have to renegotiate that all from scratch? The UK government would spend a decade doing that and nothing else. And can anyone seriously suggest that Japan or South Korea or Brazil would cut us a better deal as an island of 60 million people than as a continent of 500 million people? Now, ironically, the people who do understand this strength in numbers argument, at least in Europe, are the Scottish nationalists. They might be trying to pull away from the United Kingdom, but they're going around saying an independent Scotland would have automatic entry into the European Union, an assertion that has no basis in fact whatsoever, precisely because they see how important it is to Scottish prosperity. And they know that a separate Scotland seeking re-entry into the European Union would lose the extra benefits it gains from being part of a big member state. They don't want to face what might happen to Scotland's influence on fishing quotas or agricultural policy or the regulation of the banks. They don't want reality to bite. So they've gone into denial, preferring political assertion to legal advice. The best and most realistic choice for the United Kingdom is to stand tall in our European hinterland, for the sake of our security, our prosperity, and our place in the world. Standing tall means asserting ourselves when we need to protect the nation's interests, but also cooperating with our neighbours when it is good for the British people. In the coming weeks and months, that will mean 3 things. First, taking a tough line on the EU budget ahead of a special European Council meeting at the end of the month. The coalition government's position remains the same. We will not accept an increase above inflation to the EU budget. That is a real terms freeze. And we will protect the British rebate in full. That is the toughest position of any European Union country. At a time of deep fiscal tightening in the United Kingdom, with British taxpayers seriously feeling the pinch, we cannot support a real increase in EU spending. Labour has now taken a different position, as we saw last night, having had a sudden change of heart. Ed Balls knows only too well from bitter experience that there is absolutely no prospect of securing a real terms cut to the European Union budget. But at the 11th hour, and having stayed silent on the issue for months, Labour now proclaims that actually this is what they've wanted all along, and that they can wave a magic wand over the council negotiations and convince 26 other countries to agree. Yet it was Labour who agreed to the last long-term EU budget settlement, which saw a major jump in EU spending and lost part of the UK's rebate in exchange for virtually no real EU spending reforms. And British taxpayers have suffered the consequences ever since, with our net contributions going from less than €3 billion in 2008 to more than €7 billion in 2011. And who were 2 of the Labour MPs to vote for that? Ed Balls and Ed Miliband. And who was the Europe Minister? Douglas Alexander. Their change of heart is dishonest. It's hypocritical. And worst of all, Labour's plan could cost the taxpayer more, not less. Because in pushing a completely unrealistic position on the EU budget, one that is miles away from any other country's position, Labour would have absolutely no hope of getting a budget deal agreed, driving the EU annual budget bill up instead, over which we would have no veto power at all. We've been waiting for years for the Labour Party to announce how they would cut spending. Now they've finally come out in favour of cuts, but in a way that they know is undeliverable and in a way that would hurt British taxpayer. And it turns out that even their cuts cost money. I've heard people describe it as clever opposition politics. I suppose it is. But it's not the behaviour of a party serious about government. Yes, the British government's position is tough. Yes, it's going to be difficult to negotiate, but we're working for a deal because that is the best way to protect British interests. The Prime Minister and I, we may have our differences on Europe, but on this, we are absolutely united. To one side, we have opponents of the government pretending we can give less, and on the other side, there are some in Europe demanding we give more. But it's our job to make realistic, responsible and hard-headed decisions on behalf of the British people. This is a deal that can be done. That's the message I'm pushing with my European counterparts. With governments across Europe having to get the most out of every pound, euro or zloty they spend, a real terms freeze is a good offer. It's in the EU's own interests to be seen to be showing real restraint. Second, we need to be actively protecting and advancing the single market and our place in it for the sake of British jobs. Around 1 in every 10 jobs in Britain relies on British trade within the single market. Around half of all of our trade goes to other European states, exports from around 100,000 firms. But as Europe evolves, we cannot take the integrity of the single market for granted. That's already been made clear during the negotiations on the new Eurozone banking union, which we're having to ensure doesn't undermine the single market in financial services, prejudicing the city. And we can expect more of this kind of thing as the Eurozone integrates further. And not only will we need to defend the single market, we also need to deepen it. Removing trade barriers in services and digital industries would be worth around £3,400 a year to the average household. Money we need as we return our economy to health. But it won't happen without leadership from the United Kingdom. We were among the single market's architects. Lord Cockfield, a British commissioner, helped design it. Margaret Thatcher played a critical role in pushing it through. And today, as the most open, liberal economy in the European Union, we will need to help finish what was started 20 years ago. And that's how we send the right signal to foreign investors too. One of the reasons big multinationals come here is because we offer a launching pad to the world's largest borderless marketplace. Think of the big employers who've set up operations here: Samsung, Tata, Siemens. The automotive giants helping drive the renaissance in the UK's car industry: Nissan, Honda, BMW, Toyota. Firms who currently pay no import tariffs on the vehicles they send from here to the continent, but who would be faced with levies of up to 22% if the United Kingdom suddenly left the European Union. These companies need to be reassured that we will continue to be the best bridgehead into the European market. We cannot afford to give the impression that we're going to disengage. We need to stay focused on driving trade between us and our neighbours. That is the only way to protect British jobs. It's a position that is pro-business and pro-Britain too. Third and finally, cooperation on law and order. Before signing up to the Lisbon Treaty in 2009, the previous government negotiated an opt-out on a package of 130 crime and policing measures which predated that treaty. The coalition government now has to decide whether to stay opted into all of those measures or else pull out of the lot before seeking to opt back in to individual instruments, depending on negotiations with the Commission and the Council. A decision needs to be taken by 2014, And we will, of course, give Parliament a say. But clearly we need to agree our starting position now. So we're looking across all of those 130 measures. The government has said that our current thinking is to opt out of them en masse before seeking to rejoin those we support and need. But I want to be absolutely clear. A final decision has not been taken, and I will only agree to doing that if I'm 100% satisfied that we can opt back into the measures needed to protect British citizens, and if I'm convinced we are not creating waste and duplication, incurring unnecessary costs. We will be led by the evidence and the experts at all times. What matters is preventing crime and terrorism. This must not turn into an ideological scrap between pro and anti-Europeans. We're likely to find that some of the measures are defunct, like old measures to improve data collection in drug trafficking, or things like outdated skills directories for crime-fighting professionals, old instruments that have now been superseded. But there are others which have transformed the way our police operate, delivered justice for victims of crime where once there was none, and put thousands of criminals behind bars. It is my strong personal view that there is a great deal of value in Europol, for example, which pools intelligence to combat serious organised crime, joint investigation teams, and Eurojust, which enable cross-border operations like the ongoing investigation into the recent murder of a British family in Annecy in France. Today, if a rapist or a paedophile or violent offender living in Britain has a foreign criminal record, we can receive it at virtually the click of a button. When a forged British passport or driving licence turns up in Europe, we can find out about it straight away. When a fugitive runs from the United Kingdom, we can use the European arrest warrant to bring them back, as we saw again recently in the case of teacher Jeremy Forrester. Yes, the arrest warrant, of course it needs reform so that it is used proportionately, but it is an important crime-fighting tool. We've managed to set high standards for combating children pornography across the whole of Europe, something the United Kingdom pushed for. Our police can call on the resources and intelligence of the entire European crime-fighting community to hunt down and arrest murderers, escaped convicts, to stop billions from being laundered out of the United Kingdom every year. In the words of Hugh Ward, the president of the Association of Chief Police Officers, in the 21st century, policing is international. And to anyone who says we don't need all these EU measures to fight crime and terrorism effectively, I say this: prove it. Prove it to the police, to the intelligence agencies, to the lawyers, to the victims of crime charities. Prove it to the people who deal day in and day out with the worst criminals imaginable. Because my position is clear. I will not ask them to protect the British people with one hand tied behind their back. The UK is part of the most advanced system for combating cross-border crime on the planet, and we've been at the forefront of building it. Over the last 15 years, we've led the way on crime and policing cooperation in Europe. The head of Europol is British. The last head of Eurojust was British. The EU's police training centre is at Bramshill in Hampshire. This package of 130 law and order measures has British fingerprints all over it. And I want UK citizens to continue to benefit fully from the system we built. So, tough on the money, more jobs, more criminals behind bars. That's the deal we are going to deliver for the British people. You cannot do any of those things from the edge. You cannot deliver for British citizens when you're halfway out of the door. Europe is changing, yes. But rather than go into retreat, now is the time to confront those changes head on. We need to make a decision about who we will be in the new Europe. And I say we need to be strong, loud, present. That's the strategy that will leave the United Kingdom more prosperous, safer, strong. Standing up for the people of Britain by standing tall in our own backyard. Thank you for listening to me.